Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video from Aman Talks NRL Supercoach. Today in this video we're going to be going through which teams have got the best draws to begin the 2023 season. Obviously we don't have a lot of information to go on when we're starting building our teams for the new season, so looking at the kind of upcoming opponents and assessing their difficulty is one of the key things that we can do. So hopefully you guys find this video enjoyable. If you do, please give it a thumbs up. Do please leave a comment as well if you're keen to get back into NRL Supercoach for 2023, and let's get straight into the video. And so to start things off, because I love numbers, spreadsheets, graphs and all that kind of good stuff, I thought I'd put a little column chart here which shows you the amount of times that teams conceded less than 60 points. So obviously you'd consider the top teams to have, a higher number of those games, and that makes sense when you look at this graph here. You've got teams like the Cowboys, Sharks, Melbourne, the Roosters, Raiders, Panthers, all kind of forming the top six. And then you go further down to the right and you see the Tigers, the Knights, Dragons, Warriors, all teams that we associated with conceding more points. And so I thought it'd be good just to use this graph as a bit of a sense check to see that, yes, this kind of aligns with that general thinking. The better teams usually concede less Supercoach points, and just, also clarifying that these are Supercoach points. One thing I did find interesting though, there are still a few teams that are prone to conceding Supercoach points, despite them being a team that we may consider as a good team. So I've just highlighted some of those in red. So you can see the Bulldogs are probably a team that we normally consider as maybe a little bit more easy, but they actually ranked pretty high in terms of, not conceding too many Supercoach points. And then you look at teams like Manly, Rabbitohs and Parramatta, teams that we could probably consider as pretty decent, especially the Rabbitohs and Parramatta, but they are prone to still conceding Supercoach points. So that's something that we obviously need to think about, when we're looking at the teams and the draw. If I see a team like Parramatta, we all know that they're a good team, but they have those days where they do concede a lot of points, similar to the Rabbitohs. And so I think it's still something that's worth keeping in mind, because obviously at the end of the day, we could be versing the Rabbitohs, but if our winger still gets 2 tries against them, doesn't matter how good the Rabbitohs are. If they win 50-40, your winger still scored 2 tries and got a lot of Supercoach points. So still something I think worth thinking about. And a similar thing here to kind of signify the easy opponents. So these are the amount of games that teams conceded over 80 Supercoach points. Again, nothing too strange. I think when you look at this, the Tigers, the Knights, the Warriors, Titans, Dragons, these are all teams that concede a lot of points in the actual NRL, and obviously that translates to Supercoach points as well. Again, similar thing I think noted here. Aside from those top teams like Panthers, Cowboys, Sharks, not conceding many over 80-point scores, Parramatta, Manly, Bulldogs kind of feature in the middle here. So Parramatta are a team that do still concede those kind of higher upside games, and so still worth thinking about when we're looking at teams and the difficulty of opponent. Maybe teams like the Parramatta Eels, Manly, are teams that we still can look at and think, I think my player can still have a decent chance of actually scoring some points. And the Bulldogs, we also know the Bulldogs have had a lot of new signings and they ended the season quite well last year. But again, on face value, you might think that they're an easy opponent, but in terms of Supercoach point scoring, they're actually a little bit tighter than what we think. I think part of that was due to last year when the Bulldogs probably weren't as good. They tended to drag teams down to the level, and the game were a bit more scrappy, not as high point scoring. But obviously with the teams changing quite a bit this year, Bulldogs probably going to be a bit more of attacking outfit this year, with the likes of Marnie, Kikau, and Matt Burton having another year under his belt in the new system. We might see them being a bit more open scoring, and that actually might mean it's better for opponents as well. But again, thought it'd be useful to put this couple of charts together to see, but it generally does kind of, reaffirm our thinking that the teams that are in the top 8, the ones that we know are good, generally means it's harder to score Supercoach points against them. Okay, so team number 1 is actually the Newcastle Knights. So no surprises if you've looked at the draw or if you've had access to my spreadsheet as well. Another plug for that. I'll leave a link for the description below for anyone who doesn't know. I've built a team picker / draw sorting spreadsheet that you can access. Please just send me an email, but enough of the plugs. But if you had seen that video, you would know that the Knights come out very high in the draw sorting and actually number 1 for the first 6 rounds of the season. Lots of green fixtures in there. You've got Warriors, Tigers, Dolphins, Raiders, Manly and Warriors in the first 6. Manly we just spoke about, even though that they're a good team on paper, they are prone to conceding Supercoach points. Dolphins, obviously an unknown quantity, but we expect them to be on the poorer side of things, given that they're a brand new team. And Canberra, probably the most difficult opponent that they've got in the first 6 weeks, but generally it's a pretty good draw. Now, obviously, you'll see some of the teams are in capital letters, so that's when they play the team at home. So, looking at New Zealand away, Warriors are going to be playing back in New Zealand, so that's probably going to be, hopefully, a bit of a fortress for them. But still, I think you look at the team and you think of the Warriors as just kind of those free-spirited, offloading teams who are probably open to having a lot of points scored against them as well. So obviously a few players to consider here. Kalyn Ponga is probably the number one kind of, option that sticks out. We know he's a former Supercoach gun, very cheap price as well at 463k. I can see a lot of people starting with Ponga. There's some talk as well that he might start at the number 6 position for the Knights this season with Lachlan Miller. We've actually got as an asterisk at the moment. I don't know if it's actually been confirmed yet that he's moving from the Sharks to the to the Newcastle Knights, but apparently there's some good chance that he is going to end up at the Knights and potentially play fullback, which may move Ponga to the number 6 position. That's why I've put an asterisk next to Lockie Miller, but in the few games that he played for the Sharks last year, he looked really, really good. Dan Saifiti, I know if you're looking to go a little bit cheaper in your front row forward, he is one of those forwards who does tend to score quite a few tries as a prop. So he's also someone that you can consider, if you think that the Knights are going to start well with that draw. He might be someone who scores a few meat pies in the first few rounds, and all of a sudden you've got a front row forward on your hands who's 420k and he goes up to 500k within an instant. It's a difficult one with the Knights though. I think this is something I'm trying to be a bit more conscious of in the preseason. What I found looking at the draw is that a lot of the poorer teams do have better starts to the year. And I guess it's just that question of how much can we trust those teams to bounce back. You can see the Knights finished 14th in 2022. It wasn't a good season for them. They have made a few signings. I guess it's just how much do we trust the bad teams to start well versus the good teams and the trusted guns. My gut feeling is that we should continue to trust the good teams and the good guns, but it probably doesn't mean that with the poorer teams having some more favourable fixtures to begin the year, maybe we can take a few more punts in the beginning rounds of the season and see if we can get lucky and try, if you take a punt on a Ponga and he comes out the first 3 rounds averaging 80, all of a sudden he's going to be really heavily bought. You're going to get those points before a lot of other players as well. So it is worth thinking about. I think if you are looking to pot up, I'm probably thinking it's going to be with some of these poorer teams like the Knights, for example. Apologies, Knights fans, but I'm sure you can agree with me that 2022 wasn't a good season. But yeah, potentially someone like Ponga, Saifiti, a few other wingers or centres potentially could be options as well. But there's no doubting that the Knights do have a fantastic start to the 2023 season. So next team on the list is the North Queensland Cowboys, and this is kind of the exact opposite to the Knights, where we've got what in last season was a fantastic team that started really well. And it's not even just the first 6 weeks of the season. The Cowboys draw actually continues on till round 8. And you've got a lot of really expensive but real quality guns that we can pick from the Cowboys. Just looking at their draw to start off with, Canberra probably is going to be their hardest fixture in the first 6 weeks of the season. Apart from that, you've got a Queensland derby against the Broncos, which, to be honest, you can actually argue is a bit of a tougher matchup. But then from round 3 onwards, you've just got a bit of a dream run there with, the Warriors, Gold Coast. Bulldogs away could be a bit tougher, but Dolphins, and also we have to consider how good the Cowboys were. If the Cowboys play to their 2022 level for the first 6 weeks of the season, you're going to see some really good scores from your proven guns. Someone like Val Holmes, he doesn't come cheap, and there's going to be a question, obviously, that comes up in preseason. How much money do we invest in our center wing? It's traditionally a position where you start with some cheapies, and maybe like a 500k guy. Spending up to 630k on someone like Val Holmes when you're trying to fit in all these other guns in the team will be difficult. But it could have, bountiful rewards, right? Your goal-kicking center wing with that kind of a draw. I have tried to build a few teams where maybe I've got Val Holmes in my starting squad. It does mean you have to sacrifice in other positions, but that's just going to be the difficult decision we have to make, because you look at these games and you think, wow, the Cowboys could really start on fire. Someone like Scott Drinkwater as well kind of was revolutionary in 2022, and Reece Robson as well had a fantastic 2022. So those are a few options that we can consider. Reece Robson is maybe an alternative, if you're not looking to start with Harry Grant, who we will get onto just a little bit later. You're thinking, I want to save some money. Maybe if I do want to force in someone like a Val Holmes, maybe you go, I want Robson over Harry Grant. And then instead of maybe another mid 500k center wing, you can move up to Val Holmes. Those are the kind of decisions that I think that we're going to have to make. But when you've got a team who, performed so well last year in the Cowboys, and I do think that they're going to keep it up. I think they showed enough last season that they probably can at least stay a top 6 team. With that kind of draw, I am very conscious of this, and I do want to try to get 1 or 2 Cowboys players into my team. Val Holmes would be optimal, just knowing that he's goal kicking as well. It would just be how easy will it be to fit him in. But Cowboys, definitely a team that we need to pay attention to in the preseason. Next up, Melbourne Storm. So the Storm draw, looking at it, is a little bit more mixed on paper, but I think this comes back to the beginning of the video when we spoke about teams that, whilst they're a good NRL side, they are prone to conceding points, and that means Supercoach points. You look at a team like Parramatta and the Rabbitohs in round 5. While I've got them as kind of red fixtures, I still do think that there are teams that they can concede Supercoach points. Parramatta do seem to have won over Melbourne. They always seem to be able to come out on top of them in the big games. But look, I wouldn't let that put you off if you're looking to start with someone like Harry Grant or Cameron Munster. Munster I haven't seen in a lot of initial preseason teams, and one is obviously the price. But look, if you've got Cam Munster from the off, and then in rounds 2, 3, 4, he's got Bulldogs, Titans, and West Tigers. Come round 5, you might be thinking, why the hell did I not start with Cam Munster, knowing that he had some of those easier games? Similar argument, I think, for Harry Grant. I know I just mentioned about maybe you go with a Robson and save the money, but we know Harry Grant in his hooker position, him and Damien Cook last year were just kind of the standouts. And Harry Grant, ever since he's walked into this league, has just been... Look, after about 10 games, I thought this kid is probably the best hooker in the game, and I think we probably all agree he is at this stage, right? And look, viewers of the channel will know I do love Harry Grant as well, and I'll find it very difficult not starting with him, especially knowing he's got some of those good games in rounds 2, 3, and 4. But even teams like Parramatta and Rabbitohs, they are prone to conceding points. We know Melbourne Storm are a good team. They finished in 5th. Had a bit of a mixed end, I think, to 2022, but a full preseason in 2023. It's just one of those teams that we just know are always going to be quality and always going to be up there. So, unfortunately, Ryan Papenhuyzen, I know I've got him listed there. He was the highest averaging player in 2022, but just some news recently that he's only just started running again about 6 months after his kneecap injury. It looks doubtful for Papenhuyzen, I think, to start in our teams, especially at that really high price. But someone like Harry Grant or Munster, proven guns. I think Grant for sure is going to be someone who's very, very popular in the hooker spot. Munster maybe not as much, just given his price tag and some other good options you've got there. But again, we really can't write off the Melbourne Storm, and yeah, Grant, Munster I think are going to feature in a lot of preseason teams as well. Now, similar dilemma, I think, to what we had with the Newcastle Knights. We've got the West Tigers, who were the wooden spooners, sorry, Tigers fans, of 2022. But pretty good start, I think, to the season. You've got the Titans, the Knights, the Bulldogs. Melbourne away is obviously tough in round 4, but even Broncos, Parramatta in rounds 5 and 6, I do think are, teams that you can get some Supercoach points. I've just put a couple of options here. Adam Doueihi, I think, stands out because he's the goal-kicking playmaker of the team. He's one of those players who's almost involved in every attacking play that the Tigers make. Whether that's setting up the try, scoring himself, he's going to get the goal kicking as well. And so I see Doueihi being pretty popular, I think, actually in the 5'8 position if you are looking to dip into the West Tigers. I don't see too many other players. I know potentially someone like Charlie Staines, maybe Tommy Talau, for example, if you are looking to go with a cheaper attacking player. I'm a bit more cautious, I think, on the Tigers than, let's say, the Knights, for example. I think just given how good the Knights draw is, maybe in comparison to the Tigers, I'd maybe look to go with a nice player over the Tigers, but it's a hard one again because I probably do prefer someone like Adam Doueihi as a player himself for Supercoach, maybe compared to Ponga, given the other options we've got at fullback. So you can see that I'm very much kind of on the fence. I think I do want to try to be a little bit hesitant when we're looking at these poorer teams who have made some signings. Tigers have made a lot of signings. Zay Papali'i moving over from the Eels. We know that he is a proven Supercoach gun. But I'm just not sure how many people are going to go for him at $726,000 in a brand new team. But as a forward, maybe changing of the team doesn't seem to be as much of an issue as compared to, say, like some of your backs and your attacking players. But yeah, Tigers, pretty good opening start to the season. I'm a little bit more hesitant on them. But look, don't get me wrong. If Adam Doueihi ends up being in my starting team, I wouldn't be totally surprised because I do think he is a quality Supercoach option as well. And the final team that I wanted to actually cover in a bit more detail was the Bulldogs. I think the Bulldogs are a really, really interesting team for 2023. They made a bunch of signings. Viliami Kikau's come over from the Panthers. Reed Marnie's come over from the Eels. They finished the end of last season really well. They've got injured players like, Faitala Mariner potentially coming back as well. So that whole team makeup is changing quite a bit. And they've got a brand new coach in Ciraldo. And I think given the way that they ended 2022, they're definitely a team that I'm probably a little bit more willing, I think, to take a punt on. Like Matt Burton, for example, at 5'8". Despite how the Bulldogs were performing, he always seemed to just be punching out Supercoach scores for fun. There was a period of last season where I think he went on like a 10-game stretch where he was averaging like over 75. So while his 2022 average was 57, I think we all know the quality of the player, goal kicking, again, is similar to what I said for Adam Dewey, where he just seems to be involved in all of the team's attack. And so Matt Burton probably could be a really good option, I think, to start with your Supercoach side. Manly in round 1 doesn't really frighten me too much. Potentially they could be out without Tom Trbojevic. Melbourne away is obviously tough, but then you've got the Tigers and then the Warriors. Granted, Cowboys in round 5 is tough, but even the Rabbitohs in round 6, bit of a local Western Sydney derby. I can see someone like Burton doing well in those games. I've already mentioned Reid Marnie and Viliami Kikau as well, coming over from their respective teams. I think what I like about the Bulldogs is you've got some real good quality players there who are coming in at pretty good prices as well. All three of those guys coming in at sub 600,000. I think the price of 519k for Matt Burton, when we know he potentially could be up to like a 650k guy, based on some of the performances we saw from him last year. Bulldogs are really a really interesting team for me as well. There's probably a few other players who I haven't mentioned in there as well. Someone like a Josh Adokar. I know he can go on these ridiculous try-scoring sprees, but I think it's the playmakers and Kikau, who's last year had a really good Supercoach season as well. It's those kind of players who I think I'm really interested in from the Bulldogs, and I think round 3-4 is what really appeals to me. And I'm willing to kind of have someone like Burton in round 2 away to Melbourne, because I think Melbourne, obviously they're a quality team, but we saw at the back end of last season they can concede points, and maybe they're not quite as much of the top-notch team that we've seen in the last 20 or so years, and the Bulldogs do seem to be a team on the up as well. So yeah, definitely very interested in the Bulldogs. Matt Burton for me looks like one of the prime options, I think, who I'm very seriously eyeing up for my preseason team. And now I wanted to end the video similar to what I was discussing at the beginning. We've obviously know who are the good teams, the Panthers, the Cowboys, the Sharks, the Roosters, all those kind of teams. And while I haven't mentioned some of those teams in more detail, I still think it's worthwhile just touching upon them and thinking, look, some of those teams, while they don't have the best draw on paper, like I know if I look down here, Rabbitohs is one that sticks out, for example. They versed 4 of last year's top 8 in the first 6 rounds of the season. So if you're someone who's really looking at the draw thinking, oh wow, that's really difficult, I'm not sure if I want to start with their players like Cody Walker, for example, we probably do have to remember at the back end of last season, I know very much as firsthand, as someone who didn't own Latrell Mitchell, we know that someone like Latrell is a big game player. He is goal kicking, he's an absolute gun. I'm willing to overlook the draw when it comes to players like Latrell Mitchell. Similar thing with the Panthers, Nathan Cleary, super involved in the team's attack, goal kicking, absolute Supercoach gun, and he's been doing it for years. I know someone like him, tough games, it doesn't really matter. James Tedesco, he can score well against tough teams. They scored like a 96, I think, against the Rabbitohs last season. He scored 100 plus games as well against basically anyone, I think, under the sun in the NRL spectrum at least, doing it for years. Nicho Hynes, we saw, had an absolutely outstanding 2022 season. Sharks draw on paper, starting with Rabbitohs and Parramatta. But I think it's just really important to keep this in mind. And look, I know most people out there are not going to just completely ignore these players because of a few tough games. I think a lot of people are going to start with Nicho Hynes, Nathan Cleary, Tedesco. Latrell, I think, is one who potentially people may avoid because that draw, I think, in particular for the Rabbitohs is quite tough. But, guys like Cam Murray, Damien Cook, who are forwards, probably doesn't matter so much who they're playing. And then Latrell, who's an absolute gun, who was absolutely killing it at the back end of last season. I don't think we should just be outright ignoring these players. So I did want to mention that because I noticed when looking at the draw that a lot of these good teams didn't necessarily have the best draw on paper, but we can't ignore those absolute guns. And Latrell, look, he may end up being in my team. I know he's 300k more expensive than Ponga. He's got a much better draw, but you'd probably all trust having Latrell, I think, in your team over someone like Kalyn Ponga based on 2022 averages alone. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Latrell ends up in my preseason team as well. More of a fear of missing out because he really punished me at the back end of last season. But I think I'm going to end the video there, guys. Hopefully you found it enjoying and also found some value out of it as well. And a few, early thoughts, I think, coming into preseason. Obviously, we're still quite a way away from the beginning of the NRL season. But I still think, looking at the draw is something that is important when trying to decide, which kind of players that we want to start our teams off with. So hopefully you all enjoyed it. Please give the video a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber yet. There'll be plenty of content during the preseason as well. And if you are interested in my buy planning and my team picker spreadsheet, please refer to the video in the link below, which has further details on how to actually access the spreadsheet, as well as what the spreadsheet actually does as well. So I'll leave it there. See you all in the next one. Have a good one.